Thank you so much. I am going to be talking about type, but I'm really going to be talking about the conditions of the space that I create that allow me to do the things that I do. So bear with me, there will be type. In the summer of 2012, I moved my design studio to this building in San Francisco's South of Market area. It's above an auto glass repair shop, as you can see. At the time, I was under pressure. My previous rent had been raised astronomically, which actually happens a lot in San Francisco these days. And I had only 1 month to move out and set up a new office. And this was the best I could find. I wasn't happy about it at all. But it became an opportunity to design a space exactly how I wanted. The one thing going for it was this huge Coca-Cola sign that's towering overhead just a couple of doors down. It's actually a real landmark in the city and a beacon to the South of Market area. So that was something, at least, to look forward to. This is the space in mid-reconstruction. It had been used as an extra office and a drop-in lounge for the workers downstairs. So it was dingy with old greasy carpet, heavy drapes, bad light. It was pretty depressing. But I had the help of a former student and his interior designer partner to tear out the carpet and dig beneath the tile and the tar to find hardwood hidden below. So this is the middle of trying to find wood somewhere in the floor. We got rid of the drapes, the fluorescent lights, repainted the walls, and in 1 month's time, we transformed the space from this, it's gone, into this. So the space that I've created reflects the way I work and think about design, and it has in turn nudged me into new processes itself. And that's what I want to share with you today, how those two things work together, both reflecting and pushing me forward. I want the place where I work to be a convergence of all my interests and pleasures, collecting, building, playing, reading, drawing. It's more than a workspace, really, and this environment is really important to me. It's the only way I know how to work. I fill the space with all kinds of things I love. I nudge the artifacts into conversations with each other in interesting combinations. As you might expect, I collect lots of printed ephemera, which I like to arrange in at least what I find entertaining ways. And I look at the display of the studio as narrative itself. All parts of the studio refer to, push against, and echo each other. The collections and the space to me feel alive, and that again is really critical to my working. Now, most of the day I spend behind a desk in front of a screen, like a lot of you, primarily working on book design projects, which is what I do about 80% of my time, but I'm not going to share those with you today. Instead, I'm going to talk about the wall that's behind me when I do this work, which is right up there. It's a gathering of ephemera collected from past projects, things that are found on the street or picked up in all sorts of ways. Here's just a few details. So even here, too, I like to start creating conversations among the objects that are up there. Everything's just up with push pins. Push pin is like my favorite tool that I use all the time. And of course, there's lots of type. And some of the pieces of type that I have and collect go all the way back to my early Cranbrook days from 91, 92. But I keep everything. That's another thing. I never throw anything out, but I use it to fill the walls. Now, this design strategy is not new. This is a detail from 2002, and it's one of the first studio wall collages that I created for myself. And this collage method is so personally defining for me that when a monograph of my work was published in 2005, there is a detail of the wall right on the cover, even with the push pins. You can see right there. So that's how I've come to define myself, by what I have surrounding me. But there's a difference with the new walls in the new studio, because at the same moment I was moving my office, I discovered that during certain promotions, Walgreens would offer 4x6 photo prints for 9 cents a piece. And that was a very big deal for me, because you see, most of my type work and design studies, they use materials and they use the camera. And so they're usually always locked away in iPhoto folders, which I never get a chance to look through. So this was a chance to open up the folders, pour them into prints, and turn those pictures into real objects and plaster them on the wall like that. And that's the most important thing to me, is turning type into objectness. Here's some details. Most of the pictures on the wall involve type, and always as a material with properties. So you see examples of type bending, distorting, warping, disrupting. I like to use the camera with type as a way to investigate rather than document, and let the camera see things that I can't see. There is structure here. You may notice that all the photographs are either horizontal or vertical, and they're all filled out all the way to the edges of the wall to completely fill the space. By having this kind of rigorous structure, it allows me to have more playfulness within each rectangle here. And even type on a screen has physical properties. The type on the left were broadcast on an old-fashioned analog television where you could dial in the image itself. Now, this is another wall in my tiny little meeting space in the studio. And in 2014, I participated in a gallery exhibition called All Possible Futures. The curator was my friend, John Sweda, who is also the chair of our grad design department at CCA. John visited my studio to just discuss what he might put in the show of mine, and the idea of moving this wall into a gallery setting, well, it started as a joke and then became a challenge, and it was a challenge that I decided to take him up on. Another feature of my room, my studio, which is really important, is what I call the engine room of my enterprise. And this is a separate room set aside for non-digital work. This is where all the handwork is created. Here is just looking in the room. There are all kinds of scraps and notebooks. There's cutting tools, drawing supplies. All materials are stored in here. This is where I photograph and build and draw. And for me, it's really important to keep this space separate from the computer and always at the ready. So the camera is always attached, ready to start working. The drawing supplies are always out. So as soon as I have an idea that might involve handwork, I can go right to work. I don't have to take anything out. In this crowded space, there's also stockpiles of materials, tools, media, paper, glass, plastic, wood. Again, it's there, it's immediate and spontaneous. And I'm always intersecting this material with all forms of typography, and that's my favorite way of exploring. In addition to materials, I also scavenge for disassembled appliances, broken machine parts, toys, all kinds of discarded bits. And I'm always bringing in new batches of new materials. I collect materials on a weekly basis. This is a couple weeks worth of new stuff that I just got that I haven't had a chance to really play with yet. So it's always coming in. So when I decided to take up John on this gallery presentation, I decided to forego type for a while. I decided to work strictly with light, material, and color studies, which is very new for me. I didn't want the wall to look like a series of studies. I wanted it to look like a whole. And so rather than relying on past photo studies, I decided to create all new photography for the gallery wall. It was a gamble for me because all of this photography and all of the way that I've designed the wall has always been private. It's just for my space, and this is the first time it was going to be put out in public. So I used mingling and intersection of materials under the camera and constant observation and discovery. So this is a typical way that the setup would look as I'm moving all kinds of materials around and different kinds of light and just always exploring. So some of the images that I got, these are individual images that I would use, started to look like this. No pre-planning at all. This is just moving things in and out of view and focus. And even though I'm not working specifically with type, a lot of the images start to evoke typography, since I'm so comfortable with that. I like to use combinations of drawing, construction, and photography and crossing media all the time, and this would be an example of that as well. Constantly intersecting, and constantly things flow into each other, and I'm just always snapping the shutter. This was a weird enough image for me to decide this will be the first image I will put on the wall. So I took this one and blew it up, and that's where I began. I decided to do the wall on site in the gallery by bringing all of the photographs with me. There were about 1,500 prints. And here is the beginning of the wall on site. No pre-planning. I never do sketches first. I never pre-plan. I just put the big one down and started adding images to them, trying to create reasoning, trying to create a logic to how this thing grew and built. There I am on the ladder, putting things up. And here is the completed wall. The wall's 10 feet tall by 7.5 feet wide. It still has that same semi-tight structure. It's all put up with push pins once again. And the first time it was put into public. And I really loved doing it. It was really exciting to me to be kind of working on a tightrope, doing this right on site to see what would happen. Here's just a typical detail. Now from this, I was given a commission through Adobe Systems to participate in what they were calling Random Acts of Creativity, which was a promotional event that they were creating. And they invited me to come down to their corporate headquarters in San Jose when this is what it looks like there. And so I took it upon myself to change this a bit, to put in an installation right here. The installation was just temporary, only up for a week, and it was meant to be outside where people could intersect with it. So the outside of the Adobe headquarters changed from this to this. It's 15 columns, over 2,500 photographs, all put up with push pins, all done on site. And for all of that work, it took several months just to shoot all the images and about a week and a half on site to put this together. It was only up for a week. I know. And so these are some details. I got to have fun with some of the architectural details around and work with just the images. And again, I didn't have any pre-planning really. Back. Another detail right there. And so because this was only up for a week and the gallery show was only up for a little while, I needed to document like crazy. So I photographed every aspect of this just to have it all on hand. And it was only several months later that I decided to take the documentary photographs and see what happens if I recreate them using the original digital files. And this is one of them that I did. So I would go back and I would look at the documentation, and I tried to be as faithful as I could to the actual installation, but this time replacing the installation with the original digital files. This was very exciting to me. This seemed to be a new way of capturing the way that my walls in the studio look. There is that system, there is the rigor of it, but they start to become their own objects in their way. I was particularly drawn to the ones that involve very little color, like this one. It almost becomes a way of drawing with the camera. Now, this past year has been a sabbatical year for me, and I decided to use it to explore photography in my process as a pure pursuit, unattached to design, unattached to type, and unattached to clients, with as much depth as I could, because I really wanted my work to keep growing and developing. I decided as a temporary challenge to work only in black and white, which is something I make my students do. And so I started shooting and just keeping everything in black and white. I decided to use the exact same method. So in this case, I took a chunk of the wall and I would pin up the prints. So I would shoot about 1,500 prints, and then I would start pinning up groups of them, starting out with fairly small compositions, but this time not as souvenirs of a larger installation, but as works in their own right. I kept the process exactly the same. It started out small, and then this is what happened. Then I would translate it digitally. So I would use that full process to this point. since this is a slow process, the whole thing, the shooting the photographs takes about 3 months. Pinning each one that I pin up takes a couple of weeks to get all the images up, and takes another week to do the final translation. Since January, I've moved into much larger compositions. This one is 40 by 40. And each step along the way leaves its trace and causes effects that wouldn't happen otherwise. And that's also really important to me, is the physicality of the materials. So either I'm dealing with physical materials in front of the camera, or the prints themselves become physical objects that have real properties. So here's the translation. And you can see that I like to draw attention to the edges of the 4x6 prints. And sometimes the borders are abrupt and you see the rectangle. Other times the images melt into each other. And I really like that tension, to both address what these really are and to forget what these are. Most recently, I've been working now on black backgrounds. And I've titled this whole series, The New Machinery, is what it's all called, because I'm repurposing these bits and pieces from old machines, and there's a certain machine logic that starts to happen in the final pieces. All right, now I promised you we're going to get back to type, and here's where the type comes back in. Because while I was in the midst of this inquiry, I was given an opportunity to design the cover for the 100th issue of Design Issues Journal. And I was just curious whether this same technique could work for a design project. So for the first time, I decided to really include type and treat type as an actual material in this same process. So the only thing that they requested is that the number 100 appear somewhere on the journal. And so I began. And I started intersecting 100s with all the different materials I had on hand, keeping it in black and white because I was still doing that. Now, all of these could be fine covers, at least a way to start a fine cover on their own right, but I really wanted to see what happens when all of these things have to work together. So again, I shot about 500 of these, just all different kinds of ways, and to see if this would work. I then pin them up just like I do the other constructions. So here they are. I did a dark version and a light version just to see what would happen. And again, I'm drawing attention to the edges, and I really enjoyed the discord. And then this became the final cover. So it's the back cover, spine, and front cover of the Design Issues Journal. So I was really excited that, wow, this process of type as material, which is what caused the walls to look the way they do in the first place, also then led to this process of a way of working with type. Another project was this for the AJI conference in Seoul, South Korea, where they invite all attendees to design a poster about Seoul. And this is the second use of the project. Well, I didn't know anything about Seoul, so I said, let's just poorly typeset the word Seoul and the word electric, because a lot of images of Seoul are Seoul at night with all of the lights on. And then I took this type, and once again, and I allowed myself a little color this time, I just started working with the materials in that space to see what would happen. And then I brought a lot of these together and created this grid, but the grid is like people aren't exactly in place. They're starting to move around a little bit. And then, just as a finishing touch, I reintroduced all of the badly set type right on top of that. Now, since then, I've done a number of other projects using this process, and it's a process I'm really enjoying, and I think it's a really exciting way to work because it doesn't involve pre-planning so much, but involves the process itself and letting the process create the content. So I've used it for identity systems, for packaging, and for covers, but I still continue to do my own type explorations, and now in this case, type as material. These I just shot earlier this week, just using broken bits of type that were being thrown away, just plastic type, and bringing them into the studio to see what would happen. I still create walls when I have the chance. This is a detail from a wall I did at the Kansas City Art Institute, but in this case, the students shot all the photographs over a 6-month period. I asked them to consider photographing type primarily, although they could shoot all kinds of things that they wanted. And then I returned to the campus and I pieced the wall together with the student help. So you see, once again, maintaining the photo rectangle as the building block allows the freedom. And then here is the full wall. It's 24 feet wide by 8 feet tall. Combining all those individual rectangles into a larger space. And again, the work is not complete until it reaches the very edges of the wall. Now the wall becomes a container, and that wall is in a larger architectural structure. So now the building contains the wall, which contains the rectangles, which contains the playfulness. And you can even go a step further and beyond architecture and say an even larger, growing, changing civic structure is the umbrella for the architecture, for the wall, for the typography in the photographs. And that's really how I see my own workspace and my own work. I see it as a very small space in which I can play in an increasingly larger structure. The intimate way I design the space is inextricable from the way I work and the process I use. It allows for moments of freedom within structures of containment. So while I sit in my glowing box above the autoglass shop, my Coca-Cola friend watches over me as night falls. Thank you.